So I want to ask both of you, this film was a long time in the making. So tell me how it went when you went to Money People and said, we have this great film about a chess player.
Well, yeah. You want to go for it?
Well, it didn't. We didn't go to the Money People right away. It started about 11 years ago when I first went to a couple of writers and came up with a pitch, and then we went to Tobey Maguire. And having Tobey with us when we all walked into Sony Pictures and said, we have this great idea for a movie about a chess player. We didn't really say that. But, well, what did we say? We said, I mean, this is...
I don't recall exactly what was said 11 years ago in that room, but they were very supportive. They liked the story and were just in on it with us. And we had a bit of a journey with the development and had to go through different steps and a couple different... well, that was the initial writer team, and then Stephen Knight came on. So it was Ravel and Wilkinson, then Stephen Knight came on. So the studio was supportive through that whole process of development. But I think when we were aiming to make the film and we were looking at what the studio budget would have been and what kind of film it was, that's when that kind of question arose, and ultimately it just seemed apparent even to us before we were talking to them, look, we were going to end up taking this out of the studio and making it independently. I had always thought that the kind of sports story would be a good way to do the film and to have a kind of a character study within a sports movie. And I didn't want to do a biopic about Bobby that covered his entire life, but then to try to encapsulate a lot of what we learned about Bobby within the structure that we chose of the movie in that time period was definitely a challenge. And as I learned more and more about Bobby through reading things about him and talking to people who knew him, there were so many things that I wanted to put into the film, and it was difficult against the restraints of the form and the structure of this film. But, that's just sort of the form we chose, and then I would try to pack in anything I could that fit. And Ed Zwick, our fellow producer and director, I would come to him with some idea, and I go, okay, I know we can't do this because we're on our schedule and don't have the set, but let me tell you this amazing story. And there were just story after story that I just wish I could have put into the film.
You got a lot of little bits in there, though.
Yeah, but that's what we try to do. So we would try to sort of pull the essence of those things, those stories, and kind of layered into what the kind of real estate that we had.
In 1958 or 9, we had Van Cliburn winning the Cold War on a piano. In 1980, we had the hockey team winning it on ice, and here we had the Cold War being won on a chessboard by somebody who's a pretty fragile vessel to invest that in, and I think that came across. Was that important, that Cold War context and subtext, to tell that story, but not to make it the story?
Well, yeah, it's obviously important. It meant everything. It gives it larger meaning, and it's the reason everybody cared so much about the event. In many ways, the way I used to pitch this when I first started it was, in some ways he was the worst person to represent the United States, and Boris Spassky was in some ways the worst person to represent the Soviet Union.
Why so?
Oh, well, because he wasn't a communist. He loved the West, and for us, I mean, he was just a gentleman. He was just a nice guy, and I mean, he was a great player, obviously a great world champion. The question was he enough of a killer to to go up against Bobby.
And it's an interesting point to play off Liev Schreiber, who learned his Russian very well and who played this role very well, who, in a way, you wanted to like him, but you knew he was on the bad guy's side. We were supposed to like you, Bobby Fischer. How difficult was that with the two of you together to make sure that the sympathies were teetering but ended up falling on the right side?
I don't know what the right side is exactly, but...
Well, the American side.
Of course.
Didn't you watch the movie?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're playing into... yeah. We're playing into that to, you know, to a large degree because, I don't know, that's where we live. And, you know, it is a pretty amazing story. This kid from Brooklyn that didn't have the kind of support that the Russians had in terms of chess, and so you had a kind of a David and Goliath story there. But I liked or rooted for Liev's character in terms of, if I'm looking at the movie, I was rooting for him. I just was personally satisfied when Bobby won. And I'm not quite sure, you know, it's that we've discussed that, but I guess that part of that's just in the framework of the film, and a little less about a kind of strategy of actors from a performance standpoint. I mean, certainly, you know, us talking to each other to figure out the balance of that. That wasn't really a thing.
And for each of you, to the degree with which you were acquainted with Bobby Fischer before this project, how did you change your mind about him, if you did at all?
Well, before this project, I wasn't sure what had happened to Bobby Fischer. So I remembered him as this sort of Jewish Jewish kid from Brooklyn who sort of, you know, who became the greatest player in the world, and had lost touch with what had happened to him. And it was only when I started the project that I did a little research and realized, you know, what had really happened to him. So obviously, I know a lot more, and you know, it's a complete picture now. It's obviously very, very different than it was then.
I didn't know a lot about Bobby Fischer. I was generally aware of him. Knew that he was a great chess player. Had seen Searching for Bobby Fischer. Knew there was something about his personality that he was difficult or something, but that was about it. And so, you know, in doing the research initially, when Gail first talked to me about the project, that's when I learned the kinds of horrific things that Bobby was saying publicly. And it did give me pause at first in terms of whether or not to get involved with the project. And as I learned more and more about the story, I just thought it was a really fascinating story, and that hopefully we could, you know, weave the right elements together to be as truthful as possible and hopefully make an engaging film.